Okay. Two more chapters to complete the whole book. And then it is just test prep till the end of the course. These last two chapters are not that technical. They're more policy-based. They deal with risk and some final terminology that you'll need. And then after that, that's it, really. Now, that's not to say this is not important, because the things we are going to talk about are the things that you need to justify having a job. Because most people don't understand the technical. We have to make the technical into English so they can understand, so they see the value, so they give us the funding we need to secure whatever we're working with. Just kind of those catch-22s. So the first thing we're going to talk about is policies. Policies are high-level statements of management with intent for mandatory compliance. An information security policy will contain broad statements like the importance of cybersecurity to the organization, the requirement that all staff and contracts take measures to protect information and systems, the statement of ownership of information created or processed by the organization, the designation of a CISO or other executive who's responsible for cybersecurity issues, and the delegation of authority that grants the CISO ability to create standards, procedures, and guidelines. Creating policy is a very laborious process and requires high-level approval. Keeping policy statements high level provides CISOs with the flexibility to adapt and change with the environment. Lengthy security policies quickly become outdated as necessary changes to individual requirements accumulate and become neglected as staff become weary of continually publishing new policy versions. Policies are mandatory. You have to comply with them. And you want to write them in a way that they're broad enough to stay relevant even as things change. So things in a policy for information security would be like the information security policy that has the high-level authority and the guidance for the program, the acceptable use policy that clearly says what users can and can't do with the computers or devices that they have, data governance, who owns the information that's created on said devices, how data gets classified, whether it's unclassified, classified, secret, top secret, data retention, how long are we maintaining logs, how long are we maintaining backups, how long is data going to live, and when does data get destroyed, who handles the account lifecycle, how do we make an account, how do we provision it, how long does it stay active, how do we decommission, password policies, continuous monitoring policies, code of conduct and ethics, change management, and asset management. These are all basic information security policies that should be in existence, and if not, you'll have to help build those. But again, policies are high-level statements. A standard provides mandatory requirements describing how an organization will carry out the policy. This can include specific configuration settings for operating systems, controls for highly sensitive information, and so on. Standards are typically approved at lower levels in the organization and can change regularly. Organizations may operate in industries that have commonly accepted standards like PCI DSS that must be followed or choose a best practice. Failure to comply can be seen as negligence and cause legal liability. So whereas a policy will affect everybody everywhere and are broad statements, your standard lays out how the policy is going to be in effect. So, for example, we can say that we have a acceptable use policy where in the acceptable use policy, we say users cannot go on BitTorrent. The standard would lay out how we're going to put that into effect. We're going to prevent running BitTorrent clients. We're going to block all ports that relate to BitTorrent. We're going to monitor for BitTorrent traffic and record who is trying to do BitTorrent traffic, that kind of stuff. A procedure is a detailed step-by-step mandatory process that individuals and organizations must follow in certain circumstances. Similar to checklists, procedures ensure a consistent process for achieving a security objective. So your policy is the high level. Your standard says this is how we're going to do X, Y, and Z. From the policy, the procedure is the playbook. This is exactly how we're going to implement a network sniffer to listen for BitTorrent traffic. This is how we are going to step-by-step set in the domain to prevent anybody from installing BitTorrent clients. This is step-by-step how we are going to do X, Y, and Z. A guideline provides best practices and their recommendations offered in the spirit of helpful advice. Guidelines are not mandatory. So once again, your policies are high-level statements from management that require mandatory compliance. Your standards provide requirements that describing how the organization will carry out the policies. The procedure is the mandatory step-by-step process, and a guideline is a best practice. It's optional. I say all these things and repeat them because they show up on the test. All security policies should have a mechanism for exception to the rules. Unforeseen circumstances will always arise that require some form of deviation. The framework should lay out the exception and the individual or committee with the authority to approve these exemptions. A compensating control mitigates the risk associated with the exception to security standards. They find alternative means to achieve an objective when the organization can't meet the original control requirement. These controls balance the fact that it is impossible to implement every required security control in every circumstance with the desire to manage risk to the greatest feasible degree. So you have to have these what ifs. You have to have these plan Bs, and how are we going to keep our organization secure when things go south? Because things are going to go south. That's just how things work. In the area of personnel management, we have the principle that all users hate, least privilege. This principle says, the individual should be granted only the minimum set of permissions necessary to carry out their job functions. It's a simple concept with a challenging implementation in practice. Privileges have to be specifically issued. Privilege creep occurs when an employee moves from job to job within an organization, accumulating new privileges without the past ones revoked. Users hate this one because it says in a nutshell, users have the right to do only what they need to do their job and nothing more. That means they lose administrative privileges. Quite frankly, they didn't even need them in the first place. But they were granted by mistake. They were granted because we didn't implement proper control. We didn't have a policy. And now we have to revoke it. Oh, that's always trouble. But it's important. People only need to do what they need for the job. They don't need more. If they want more, they need to go buy their own home computer and use it at home. Our work systems are not their home systems. They shouldn't be. Separation of duties. No single person should have all the privileges to perform one or more important tasks. For example, an accountant cannot create a new vendor and issue a check. A systems administrator should not be the network administrator. You want to divide out the administrative rights so that no one person can do serious damage. There is also this concept of two-person control. It's similar to separation of duties. Instead of preventing the same person from holding two different privileges that are sensitive when used together, two-person control requires the participation of two people in order to perform a single sensitive action. Job rotation and mandatory vacays are another useful tool. In job rotation, employees that have sensitive roles will be moved periodically to other positions in the organization. This is useful in detecting fraud because it requires ongoing concealment that would be discovered by a new person stepping in the same role. Mandatory vacations does a similar thing to job rotation. It forces the employee to take a vacation, and during that vacation, their access is revoked because they're on vacation. So you're not supposed to be working. So we're going to change your password. We're going to lock you out of everything. And while you're gone, we're going to do an audit on the account. We're going to see what you've done, see what files you have, et cetera, for the same reason of detecting fraud, detecting any illegal usage of the account of the systems. Clean desk. Clean desk policies are designed to protect the confidentiality of sensitive information by limiting the amount of documents, of papers exposed on an unattended employee desk, and require that all papers and other materials be secured before an employee leaves their desk. Like this problem, where in Hawaii, the user who controls the alarm system, I think it was the alarm system for either earthquakes or a hurricane, had their password in a sticky note that somebody zoomed in and was able to read and was able to log in and cause mayhem. Wouldn't have been a problem if there was a clean desk policy. Onboarding and offboarding should have policies in place with standards and procedures. You want to have an organized and clean way for new people to get onboarded to join the company, like making accounts, setting up email, doing setting up their laptop or whatever, and how to offboard without risk to the company. Offboarding is usually the more risky of the two. So you want to have a clear policy on how to deal with that. Non-disclosure agreements require that employees protect any confidential information they gain during the course of their employment. Organizations normally ask new employees to sign an NDA upon hire and periodically remind them of their responsibilities. Offboarding will require exit interviews and a final reminder of the employee's responsibility to abide by the terms of the NDA. Just because you're no longer hired doesn't mean you are now free to speak your mind and divulge the contents of the things you learned. Social media being everywhere, that also needs to have its own policy. What is okay and not okay for your users to do? Is it okay for them to take pictures of themselves next to walls with intellectual property and post it on social media? Probably not. And of course, user training. Having users regularly receive security awareness training, doing things like gamification to help train, because nobody likes another meeting. Nobody likes being talked to, but maybe you can find various games or various activities to help folks stay on alert. Encourage them to watch out for stuff, because that's always happening. Now, those are all internal. We also have to think about the third parties that we deal with. Many risks come from the third parties that we need in our organization. So we have to protect ourselves with things like master service agreements, statements of work that contain specific details, service level agreements. These are contracts that specify the conditions of service that will be provided by the vendor. We have memorandums of understanding and business partnership agreements. All of these are very important documents that we need to be aware of when working with third-party vendors, third-party partners, anybody who's outside our organization. There are a number of laws that you need to be familiar with, and by familiar, I mean when I say the name, you can use a one sentence to describe. So, for example, HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accounting Act. That has security and privacy rules that affect healthcare providers, health insurers, and health information clearinghouses. If you are doing anything with health, you have to follow HIPAA. That's the very easy way that I remember when I'm taking these tests. HIPAA equals health. PCI DSS, the payment card industry data security standard. It's a contractual obligation to merchants and service providers worldwide. It provides detailed rules about the storage, the processing, the transmission of credit and debit card information. PCI DSS is all the plastic, all the rules and regulations that surround using our plastic credit cards. So if your business accepts credit cards, you have to be PCI DSS compliant. GLBA covers United States financial institutions. So GLBA is all about financial institutions, not health, financial institutions. Sarbanes-Oxley applies to financial records of US publicly traded companies and requires a strong degree of assurance for IT systems that store and process those financial records. Is your company a publicly traded one? You're going to have financial records. You have to protect them under Sarbanes-Oxley. GDPR. If you are doing anything with Europe, with any country in the UN, or not the UN, the EU, if you are doing anything with a company that lives in the EU, you have to abide by GDPR. FERPA. Any US educational institution has to follow FERPA. And that's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Again, you don't have to know the law in great detail. You don't have to be like a lawyer and be able to quote any of these laws, but you need to know the acronym and know what it ties to. Some frameworks that you need to be aware of is like the NIST cybersecurity framework. Came out in 2018 with these 5 objectives: the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. There is 3 main components: the framework core, the framework tiers, and framework profile. This is all in existence to help you create policies, create frameworks for your business. Again, you don't have to be all-knowing, but you need to understand that in the NIST cybersecurity framework are these 5 words. There's risk management framework. These are mandatory standards for federal agencies. Security Plus does mention both the cybersecurity framework and the management framework. There are 4 ISO standards that you need to be aware of. And again, you have to just understand what they are and be able to recall them, not so much be able to quote them. You have the ISO 27001 that has 14 categories that all relate to cybersecurity. 27002 goes beyond the first and covers privacy. ISO 27701, it has standard guidance for managing privacy controls, and it's also an extension of 27001 and 2. And there's 31,000 who provides guidelines for risk management programs in a general way that can be applied to any risk. So being able to recall what ISO 27002 is for, it goes beyond 27001 and covers privacy. Remembering that 27701 is a guidance for managing privacy controls, things like that. These small little things will help you on the test. This chapter wraps up with security, control verification, and quality control. Audits are formal reviews of an organization's security program or specific compliance issues conducted on behalf of a third party. They require rigorous formal testing of controls and result in formal statement regarding the entity's compliance. Audits can be done by internal audit groups or external firms. A SOC, not what you wear, a service organization control audit has three different assessing engagements for an organization. There's the SOC 1 that controls what might impact the accuracy of financial reporting. SOC 2 affects the security and privacy of information that's stored on a system. SOC 2 audits are confidential and shared outside an organization under an NDA. SOC 3 is the same as SOC 2, but the difference is a SOC 3 goes public. In addition, there are two types of SOC reports. The type 1 is the auditor's opinion on the description provided by management. Type 2 confirms the controls are functioning properly. So if you have a SOC 2 type 1 audit, that is one that is looking at the security and privacy of information stored on a system and is the auditor's opinion based on descriptions provided by management and others involved. A SOC 2 type 2 report, an audit report, would have the security and privacy information stored on a system and would confirm whether those security and privacy systems are actually working. Questions? No questions? No questions. Okay. Then on to chapter 17. Chapter 17 covers the very existence of our careers. Without this, we don't have a reason to exist. We don't have a reason to get paid. Very easy for an employer to not want to hire us. And that is risk. Our entire existence is based off of risk. Organizations must take a formal approach to risk analysis that begins with identifying the risks, determine the severity of each, and adopting one or more risk management strategies to address them. So we have a threat, any possible event that might have an adverse impact on the information or the system. There's the vulnerability, the weakness in the system or control that would be exploited by the threat. And the risk is the intersection of the two. But good to know that a threat without a corresponding vulnerability does not pose a risk. Neither does a vulnerability without a corresponding threat. For example, if your home has nothing but Macs, from an Apple TV to MacBook Pro to Mac Mini to iPhone, you have nothing but Mac stuff in your home. Do you care? Do you worry about a Windows vulnerability? Exactly, you don't. Yes, there's a vulnerability, but it does not provide a threat. Therefore, there's no risk. So we have to identify our risks. Is it external? Which can be an extremely broad category. This could be an adversary. This could be a piece of malware. This could be an asteroid hitting the Earth. It's a threat. Could be a real threat. Is it really going to affect us? Maybe not. You have the internal. That can be a malicious insider, a mistake from an authorized user, an equipment failure, and so on. It could be a multi-party, like a power outage or a software as a service provider compromise. It could be legacy systems that we just can't patch because there are no patches for, but are essential to our business. Intellectual property, trade secrets that could compromise the organization's business advantage. Software compliance and licensing, either intentionally or accidentally running afoul of usage limitations that could cause financial or legal risk. And now for some math. When evaluating any risk, we have to give it a number because numbers make sense to the average person. If you can't quantify it, if you can't bring a number to it, if you can't explain it, then it becomes hard to justify why we need to purchase X, Y, and Z. So when evaluating any risk, we multiply the likelihood or the probability that the risk would occur over a specific period of time and the magnitude of the impact that the risk would have on the organization if it occurs. There are some laws and regulations that play a significant role in impact in determining the impact of a risk. This equation should not be interpreted literally always. It's best to think of it conceptually as combining the likelihood and impact to determine the severity of a risk. There is a math equation that you should use for risk assessment. And this one is the single loss expectancy, SLE. To figure this out, we take the asset value by risk in dollars, using the cost to acquire, replace, or depreciate the cost of the asset. And we multiply that by the exposure factor, which is expressed as a percentage of the asset expected to be damaged. So a completely destroyed asset has an EF of 100%. So this equation calculates the amount of financial damage expected each time a risk materializes. Because how best to talk about the damage of something to C-suite levels if it's not with money? This one is the annualized loss of expectancy. How much damage are we going to be losing every year? So the first one is a single loss expectancy. This one is over a year. How much damage are we going to expect out of a risk? You could also use a qualitative risk assessment, something like this, where you could even use colors to help you express risks. It all depends on the risk, if you can put a monetary value versus something like this. And that's something that you have to field and figure out. It's definitely not a set and forget type of situation. When managing risk, we really have 4 ways of handling it. We either accept the risk, where we deliberately choose to take no other risk management strategy and simply continue operations as normal. There's the avoidance, where we try to completely eliminate the potential a risk will materialize. While that sounds like the most desirable, it's not the most realistic, because we could say a threat that we have, a risk that we have, better said, a risk that we have is a DDoS attack on our business. Well, how do you mitigate a DDoS attack? Simple. Disconnect the internet. Will it neutralize the risk? Yes. Will we be offline? Yeah. Is it going to cause other problems? Yes. But does it handle the risk? Yes. So avoidance is not always the go-to. There is risk transfer, where we shift the impact of the risk to another entity, like insurance. Customer pays a premium to the insurance carrier and agrees to cover the losses from the risk in the policy, like the loss of revenue during an attack. And the last one is reducing or mitigation. We apply security controls to reduce the probability or the magnitude of the risk. Like a firewall. When we deal with risk analysis, are we inheriting risk where the original level of risk existed before implementing a control? We need to look at the residual risk, things, whatever remains after implementing a control, and the appetite, the level of risk that we are willing to accept as a cost of doing business. Again, this is all stuff that you need to be able to use diagrams, to use dollars, to use clear ways to talk to the C-suites and go, what are we risking here by doing X, Y, and Z? The inevitable disaster will occur. So we have to plan for them. We have to prepare for them. We have to have a formal, broad plan that we need to use when it happens. Hey, I have no pictures. You know what? Not sure why that vanished, but these terms right here are important. They show up on the test. The mean time between the failure, the mean time to repair, the recovery time objective, and recovery point objective. These show up, and they tend to show up as just the acronym. They'll give you a time, they'll give you a value, and they'll ask you, what is the mean time between failures? For example, a hard drive. What is the mean time to repair when the NAS system holding that hard drive fails? How much time is it going to take for us to repair? The recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Lastly, you see these terms. You've seen them throughout the course. They're kind of put back here again as a repeat because they do show up, like PII versus PHI. The different classifications. The government uses these four: top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified. Business uses different terms. They can use some of the same, but they tend to do their own too. These were mentioned already: the data controller, the data steward, the data custodian. Who has access to the data, who sets the permissions to access data, who actually uses the data. These terms, these four, I forgot to mention processors. These four are important because these are usually the legal terms that show up in policies, where it says the data processor does X, Y, and Z. The data custodian does X, Y, and Z, and it's written into the policies, into the standards, into the procedures. This is always a nice concept, that you only collect the minimal thing that you need, the minimal amount of data in order to do your job, to complete a task. Tell that one to Google. Some ways to enhance privacy on data that we can't remove identifiable information. Could be like hashing, where we take a representation of data. We have tokenization. And we have data masking, like putting stars instead of the actual numbers for a credit card or an SSN. Again, these are not new terms. We've covered them before, but they are put back here at the end to remind you that they show up. And with that, we have completed all the chapters in the Security Plus Prep book. Hooray. There are two final things to do. Number one, you have a research assignment where you can look up 3 companies and find at least 4 of their reports, not their reports, their documents or policies, and make a report based on what you found. Now, again, it doesn't have to be a 20-page paper. Is that what I'm looking for? It's answering these questions. Pick any 3 companies that you'd like. Doesn't matter to me. One of them could be a company that you work for. That's fine. The last thing is this guy down here. The Security Plus 601 practice. This is loaded with questions that are the closest you'll find to Security Plus, to the actual exam. You are able to take this as many times as possible to help you prepare. I highly suggest to do it. I used it when I renewed my Security Plus. I took this. You are more than welcome to try and try again. Even if you get a perfect score, try again. There's a lot of questions for you to use, and I keep adding more. Again, if you are able to sign up and pass the Security Plus before the semester is over, you get a perfect A, because you completed the whole purpose of the course. For all of us who are in a college, there is a voucher in the homepage right down here. You select your college. And you find Security Plus, which will be offered to you at a discount from the original price. And you'll just add it to the cart and work your way through, and you will have a voucher to take Security Plus at a much lower price. And you can use that to take the test either in person or online. Any questions? Excellent. As always, send me a message on Discord if you have any questions, if you need GCP credit, if you're stuck on a question in the practice. Everything is due. A reminder, everything is due May 18th, and I will be posting on Discord as we reach that end. So make sure you get everything turned in. Remember that I don't penalize for late assignment. So if you are turning in stuff from week 1, you'll still get full credit. But once we reach that due date, that due until date, to be specific, then nothing will be accepted.